Today I wanted to do some side-by-side testing with this Chris Reeve Sebenza small 31 in Magnacut steel. We see that scores a 5 out of 10 or 11 on the scale of edge retention. You can see it's nice and sharp. And this Sebenza is 22 thousandths behind the edge there. And we are going to put it up against this MBK Old Guard in M390. Now this is a Chinese OEM MBK, so we're not entirely sure on how that M390 is treated, but M390 generally scores a 6.5 on the scale of edge retention, or about 30% more than Magnacut. And the MBK has about 17 thousandths behind the edge. So let's move on to some initial sharpness testing. So with the Sebenza, we've got a score of 146, and with the MBK and M390, we've got 179, and that's the amount of grams that it takes to cut that wire. So let's go ahead and move on to some testing. So I started with the small Sebenza in Magnacut, and it does have a nice hollow grind. It is very slicey. It is a little thicker behind the edge, and I could feel that especially with those small handles. So this, I set out the same amount of cardboard with each knife, so they are roughly going to have the same amount, and about 1.5 foot of sizzle rope with a cut every couple of centimeters. Moving on to the MBK and M390. Now I could tell that this was immediately much easier to work with the geometry. It wasn't drastically different behind the edge, and it wasn't as sharp initially, but probably the larger handle and that little bit of extra thinness helped it a little better. So let's move on to our post-cutting tests. We can see with the paper there's definitely some difference in the cutting ability on the Sebenza. And 230. So we went from 146 to 230, or an additional 84 grams of pressure to cut that line. Moving on to the MBK and 390. This one still seemed a good bit sharper. 238, 179 to 238, or a difference of 59. So the Magnacut took an additional 84 grams of pressure to cut that line, and the M390 took an additional 59 grams of pressure to cut the line. The difference of that performance decrease in relation to the Magnacut is right at about 30%, just in line with what we see in the steel charts. I also decided to take the opportunity to strop these blades back a bit, give them a little more life, and I kind of wanted to see what kind of decrease in required pressure it would take. So, and this was just a few passes on the strop, and we see a 92 gram decrease in the required pressure to break that line. So that's a pretty good performance increase just from a little bit of stropping, maybe a minute per each of these. Definitely feel a noticeable difference in cutting this paper with the M390. We see an 84 gram difference just from stropping. So the final results, the Sebenza in Magnacut, 22 thousandths behind the edge, saw an 84 gram increase from the cut tests. The MBK in M390, 17 thou behind the edge, and this one only had a 59 gram increase after the cutting. The difference between those is about 30%, and that could just be a coincidence. I may have gotten lucky. I'll probably do this test again just to see how repeatable it is. I did find that interesting. Now, given their differences in ratings in the steel chart, I wouldn't say that geometry played too much of a role, at least in the decrease in performance in the cut test as we saw here. But if there are any two particular steels or any two knives that you have seen in my collection that you would like to see me test in this way, let me know. Thanks for watching.